The conference room was colder than usual, sterile, silent, the kind of silence that hummed in your ears. Frosted glass walls filtered the buzz of the floor outside into something distant and abstract, like a city heard underwater. Reagan Thorne stood at the window, back to me, arms crossed neatly behind him. He didn't turn when I walked in, just gestured at the chair across from his. "Close the door, please." I did, slowly. I didn't ask questions. That was part of the game. He finally turned and approached the table, sliding a sheet of paper across the smooth glass surface, like it was an afterthought. "The kind of paper you're not supposed to read, just sign. Let's make this easy," he said, voice dry as sand. "Sign right now, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." He sat back, arms folded, mouth neutral. He didn't blink. Behind him, a security guard loitered just out of earshot, stationed conveniently near the hallway entrance. Someone had clearly thought this through. I looked at the paper without touching it. It was a standard resignation form, clean, Sterwin Biologics logo in the header. My name already filled in. Beneath it, the words, "I voluntarily resign from my position, effective immediately." I tapped the corner of the document lightly, then flipped it open on the table as if complying. My eyes scanned the margins. I clicked the stylus pen I'd brought, its real function hidden, a micro-reading device embedded in the clip. I tilted it just right and waited. Creation date 5 days ago. I stared at that line. 5 days ago. That was 2 days before my first performance concern email. 3 days before the sudden demotion. 4 days before access restrictions hit my shared folders. I felt it all at once. Anger, certainty, clarity. This wasn't about performance. It never was. I'd just gotten too close to something they didn't want found. He leaned in. "Do you need more time?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm ready." I reached into my bag slowly and retrieved the nearly identical document I had prepared the night before, down to the font and logo. I signed it with deliberate ease, making sure the revised language was legible. Constructive dismissal following documented retaliation. Then I slid it back across the table and held his gaze. Reagan didn't read it. He smiled like someone who thought he'd won. Reagan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, cursed under his breath, and stood. "Don't go anywhere," he muttered already, halfway to the door. The click of his shoes faded as he stepped into the hallway, voice low and clipped as he took the call. The second the door closed, I moved. From my folder, I slid out the duplicate resignation form I had printed on Sterwin letterhead, identical in layout, tone, spacing. Every line mimicked theirs except one I had rewritten the sentence just enough to shift everything. I checked the wall clock, 9 to 16 a.m., and quickly jotted the time and date in the margin beside my signature. Then I added my initials in the lower corner, not out of necessity, but to create a pattern, a habit, something defensible. Finally, I snapped a photo with my phone and locked the screen. The original form remained folded in my lap. I lifted my eyes to the door, breathing slowly. It was over in seconds, but it had taken months to get here. 3 months ago, I began to notice the edits, subtle at first. My name removed from credit slides, project dashboards modified without approval. Then came the permissions folders I created, grayed out my own data, restricted under generic security policy updates. I filed IT tickets. They went unresolved. I was told I must have clicked something wrong. I hadn't. Meetings moved without notice. Tasks reassigned while I was offline. Colleagues who used to stop by my desk suddenly seemed busy, cautious. No one said anything, but the shape of avoidance is always visible if you watch closely enough. A week ago, a message landed in my personal inbox. No subject, no body, just a file attachment titled sterwinexitform.docx. Clean, untouched. Dated 2 weeks prior. It didn't come from a known address, but the header matched the HR format exactly. Someone had forwarded me the company's resignation template before I knew I'd need it. Whoever it was didn't include a message, but they didn't have to. I took the hint. Reagan re-entered the room, still holding his phone. "Sorry," he said, barely glancing my way as he pocketed the device. "Let's wrap this up." He reached for the document without reading it, his thumb pressed against the paper with quiet finality. I walked past Reagan without looking back. His satisfaction hung in the air like humidity, dense, manufactured, designed to stick. The resignation letter was tucked neatly in his folder, and I doubted he'd read it even by the time I left the building. That was his flaw. He only looked at what served him. My heels echoed against the polished tile as I turned down the corridor toward human resources. The elevator was too slow today, so I took the stairs, each step measured and steady, the envelope gripped lightly in my hand. I had sealed it before the meeting labeled it Personnel Record Ramirez D. in my clean academic print. Morel Stanton, the HR director, sat in her glass-paneled office, eyes glued to her monitor, face expressionless. I knocked once on the frame. She looked up, startled only briefly. "Delara," she said, voice cautious. "I didn't expect I know," I replied. "This is for you." I stepped inside and laid the envelope gently on her desk. She reached for it instinctively but hesitated at the weight. Not physical, emotional. Inside were 4 things, and a 5th, invisible piece. A USB drive nested beneath the documentation, encrypted and labeled innocuously. That USB contained every piece of evidence I had compiled over 3 months, every discrepancy, every log, every memo that vanished from shared drives. It was set to trigger an auto-upload to a protected whistleblower database, if not disabled, within 48 hours. I met Morel's eyes as she slid the envelope toward her keyboard. Neither of us said much. Maybe we didn't need to. She knew what this was, knew the pressure behind it, knew the silence it would challenge. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the office glass, shoulders squared, jaw set. Not a woman retreating, a woman who had just activated a fuse. Security was waiting by the exit. I nodded at the guard and we walked toward the front doors without a word. The next morning, I opened my laptop out of habit, even though I already knew what I'd find. My Stirwin email was deactivated. The login portal returned a sterile user not recognized message. My calendar access was gone. My employee badge app had revoked itself from my phone. I wasn't surprised. That was the routine after all. Isolate, erase, move on. Still, the finality of it lingered like a door quietly locking behind me. By mid-morning, I received a message from Lily Tran, one of the interns who used to shadow me during compliance reviews. It came through Signal, a line we'd only used once before when she accidentally sent me a flagged document meant for finance. Today, she sent a screenshot. It was a Slack thread from the Internal Performance Ops channel, time-stamped 30 minutes after I left the building the day before. Let's make her quit before she talks. Already handled. Letter signed. There was no context, no names, but I recognized the tone. Casual conspiracy. The kind of back-channel arrogance that festers in companies too comfortable with their own immunity. They thought they'd sealed it, that a signature meant silence. They hadn't read the fine print. That afternoon, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Delara Ramirez," the voice asked. "Yes, this is Amina Holloway from Corporate Oversight. HR forwarded your submission. The executive team would like to meet with you." The pause that followed was deliberate. In person. Tomorrow morning, if possible. No threat. No accusation. Not even the usual scripted professionalism. Just a flat request from a department that rarely reached out unless something serious had been triggered. They weren't calling to finalize my exit. They were calling because the situation had breached whatever internal threshold required escalation. Whatever legal, procedural, or reputational fire had begun burning overnight was spreading faster than they anticipated. I confirmed the time and hung up. Then I opened the file marked Failsafe Archive V3 and began printing copies for the meeting. I arrived 10 minutes early. Madeline was already there, seated near the security desk in a slate gray suit, with a file folder open and 3 color-coded tabs sticking out like sharp corners. She didn't greet me with a smile, just a nod, and a short, "You brought the originals," I handed over the file without a word. She glanced through it, made one correction to the order of the appendices, then closed it with a snap that sounded louder than it should have. We were escorted to the 15th floor, a space I'd never been invited to before. The glass felt thicker, the furniture quieter, like even the chairs knew things they wouldn't repeat. Inside the room were 3 faces. I expected Morel from HR, Pascal from legal, and a woman I didn't know who introduced herself as Amina Holloway, from corporate oversight. Then there were the others. 3 women seated side by side on the opposite wall. I recognized 2 by name, 1 by face. Different departments, different roles. None of us had ever worked directly together. We exchanged looks that weren't quite smiles, more like acknowledgments. Madeline sat tall. I took the seat beside her, eyes forward. Pascal began with a cautious preamble thanking us for coming, outlining a gathering of context and a fact-finding phase. I stopped listening after the 3rd euphemism. My attention was on the woman 2 seats down. Her name was Renee Colston from Supplier Compliance. She waited until introductions were over, then cleared her throat. "I submitted my complaint yesterday," she said. "It wasn't about retaliation. Not at first. I flagged a vendor discrepancy 2 months ago. Reagan told me to bury it. 2 weeks later, he put me on a performance watch. Last week, he hinted I should start considering my next chapter." The air shifted. Madeline's pen stopped moving. My hands relaxed in my lap. It hadn't been personal after all. It had been process. Reagan hadn't just come after me. He'd been doing this in waves, erasing anyone who got too close to something they weren't meant to see, and he'd clearly done it before. Amina gave me the floor. I didn't bother with a preamble. No slide deck, no polished speech. Just the printouts and the spreadsheet I had been refining for weeks laid flat on the table in a silent challenge. The columns were color-coded. The totals highlighted the patterns impossible to ignore once you knew where to look. I started with the reallocations. Tiny amounts shifted between departments just beneath the threshold that would trigger an audit. Each transfer labeled with vague justifications, adjustment temporary, hold alignment correction. None had the required approvals. Most skipped 1 or more stages in the sign-off process. Some skipped all. Next came the invoices. Vendor payments that looked normal at first glance until I ran them through entity matching tools. A dozen of them led to limited liability companies, registered in 3 states, all less than 18 months old. The names varied. The service descriptions were deliberately bland, but the signatures, always the same 2 initials in the payment authorizations, RT. Then I showed the real link. Vendor Crenshaw Logistics paid $128 for storage audits that never occurred, was registered to LSW Claiborne. A quick cross-reference revealed Ellis was Reagan Thorne's first cousin. Different last name. Same hometown. They shared a home address briefly 10 years ago on a mortgage record I'd found buried in a public property archive. I didn't speak for effect, just laid it out and let the silence grow. Pascal shifted in his chair. Morel stared at her notepad like it might offer an escape route. Amina didn't blink. She simply asked, "Is it traceable?" I nodded. Fully. Dates, amounts. Metadata sign-offs. It's all in there. She tapped her pen once on the table, the sound sharp against the tension. "I'll need copies." "They're already in your inbox," Madeline said before I could reply. No one asked how we'd found it. No one questioned why we had it. The documents answered for themselves. Reagan hadn't just manipulated the system. He had used it like a blueprint. And we'd just handed them the map. By the following morning, Reagan's name was gone from the internal directory. No memo, no announcement, just silence and the sudden absence of a man who had once moved through the halls like gravity itself. I received a short message from Amina. Just before noon, Mr. Thorne has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. It was the closest thing I'd ever received to corporate acknowledgement that something real had happened. That same afternoon, at least 4 mid-level managers lost access to their accounts. All had signed off on invoices I'd flagged in my report. Some were already on leave. One resigned without explanation. Another called in sick and never returned. At 3:17 p.m., I received a knock on my apartment door. It was Jules, a systems tech from IT I used to work with during a risk assessment pilot the previous year. He handed me a flash drive. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, "but you need to know." The drive contained a server access log from 2 nights earlier, time-stamped within hours of when Reagan called the resignation meeting. Over 200 files had been accessed and deleted. Most of them were financial archives, old budget justifications, approval forms, everything connected to vendor activity and discretionary fund allocation. But here's the thing. Our systems didn't permanently delete anything. Not immediately. Jules pointed to the log again. They were marked for deletion. But the backups kicked in. The redundancy protocol caught it. Everything he tried to erase is still sitting on the level 3 mirror server. Everything he confirmed. And it's been flagged now. Official chain of custody started this morning. By the next day, the audit team arrived external independent, and from a firm I recognized for their work in federal compliance cases. They set up on the 12th floor and requested keycard logs, VPN activity, and employee interviews going back 18 months. The tone inside the building changed overnight. No one was safe behind polite titles anymore. The night before the federal auditors were scheduled to begin interviews, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window lights off the soft blue glow of the city, pushing faint shadows across my floor. I had just finished reviewing my timeline notes when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, no name, no history. I almost didn't open it. "You win." But not forever. No signature, just 7 words, but I didn't need one. I forwarded the message to Madeline without a comment. She replied 5 minutes later asking if I still had the number. I did. She took it from there. By morning, she had an answer. It came from a prepaid phone purchased 4 days ago in Missouri, registered under a holding name owned by a shell company called Delmira Facilities. Her tone was measured, but I could hear the tension beneath it. Delmira was one of the vendors on my list. Small, vague, suspicious billing for operational consulting. We'd flagged it in the audit preview, but now it had teeth. "He's not just trying to scare you," Madeline said. "This is a message. He's telling you this goes further than him." She was right. The breadcrumbs were deliberate. Reagan could have sent it anonymously. He wanted me to know it was him. Wanted me to understand that he wasn't the only one with something to lose, and that taking him down might bring others with him. I saved the message, screenshotted the details, and encrypted it with the rest of the evidence package. Then I sat in silence, letting the room settle around me. He wasn't denying what he'd done. He was warning me. But I'd stopped being afraid of warnings. The next morning, I stepped into the 12th floor interview suite, handed over my timeline, and began walking the lead investigator through every folder signature and payment loop. They listened closely, asking few questions. By the time I left the room, a second team was already being dispatched to investigate vendor ownership records. 3 weeks after the final audit interview, an internal memo circulated quietly through encrypted inboxes. Reagan Thorne had been indicted on multiple counts of corporate fraud, falsification of records, and obstruction of internal investigations. His name no longer appeared in any directory. His badge access was deactivated. His office had been cleared before sunrise. The company called it a difficult but necessary chapter. Several executives announced early retirements over the next few days. One took an indefinite leave of absence. Another issued a generic statement about new ventures and vanished from LinkedIn hours later. Stirwin moved quickly after that. An independent oversight committee was formed. Anonymous reporting protocols were implemented. Every employee received new training in whistleblower protections and financial compliance. For the first time in years, the system felt like it had cracks of sunlight in it. But the part that stayed with me came quietly. Madeline pulled me aside after a late debrief and handed me a folded note. She didn't explain, just nodded once and walked away. Inside, written in small, careful handwriting, was a single line. I couldn't watch another woman's career be erased. Below it was a signature, Arden Hale. Arden worked in legal support, quiet, always efficient. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her in the past year. She had been the one who sent me the clean resignation form, the first warning, the silent hand reaching across the dark. I never replied. I never had to. Later that week, Amina asked to meet in her office. She didn't waste time. We need someone to rebuild our internal integrity infrastructure, someone with first-hand knowledge. We'd like to offer you the role Director of Integrity Operations. I asked for the full scope. I asked for independent reporting authority. I asked for protected access to internal audit data, not just surface-level review. She agreed to every term. By the following Monday, my name appeared again in the directory. New title, new floor, new system credentials. And the first task, waiting in my inbox, was a flagged document from legal. A review request, marked confidential, executive bonus adjustment policy. The conference room was standing room, only employees from every department, managers and the back interns along the walls. The first annual ethics seminar under the new protocols wasn't mandatory, but it may as well have been. I stood at the podium in a navy blouse. No slides, no stagecraft. Just the full weight of what we'd learned and what we refused to repeat. I spoke plainly about failure, about silence, about the patterns that don't seem like patterns until someone draws the line. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Near the end, I looked out at the room and said, the most dangerous trap isn't a lie. It's the belief that no one will ever look closely enough to catch it. There was no applause, just a kind of breathless stillness that meant they'd heard it. 3 days later, the news broke. Reagan had taken a plea deal in exchange for cooperation. One of the board members, quiet senior, long assumed untouchable, had been named in the indictment filings. The fallout was immediate. Media scrutiny surged. Stirwin's stock dipped fast and hard. Statements were issued. Legal counsel shuffled. Shareholders demanded transparency. And then slowly it turned. The press began quoting excerpts from the internal reforms, the ethics protocols, the audit structure, the new compliance team under a woman with no prior executive background, but a name now synonymous with the word accountability. My name. I wasn't the face they expected, but I became the one they trusted. It didn't happen with headlines. It happened with checklists, with weekly review sessions, with people whispering thank you in the elevator and leaving sticky notes that said keep going beside the compliance mailbox. The company stabilized. Then it improved. People stopped looking over their shoulders and started looking into their data. I kept Reagan's message, not out of fear, out of memory. I didn't sign the resignation letter they gave me. I signed their reckoning. And somehow, in a system designed to erase people like me, a single altered line turned into a new line of leadership, a new language for truth, a signature that rewrote the rules.